Josh and I from UNSW are going to be talking about active tutorials that we have been implemented in 2 first-year courses, and we've been using group work and shared documents. So first, I'd like for you to see what we were doing and describe what we're doing now. So our math and stats tutorial before COVID usually looked like that: a teacher at the front talking to students and explaining the problems. Because I call the other one active tutorial, I don't want you to think that I'm calling this one passive one. So first, we had also some online ones. And in the online one, we usually had something prepared for the tutors where they would have the lecture slides. So that's the example of stats. They would have the question. So they have this OneNote, and then we send the link, and then the tutor would handwrite over there. The reason to have copies of the slides in the actually in the OneNote is that some of our students need a bit of guidance about how to actually study. So we had to point them, see, you use this theorem, and then you need to look it up in the lecture notes. And it seems obvious, but for some of them, it seemed to be a big discovery that when they're lost, they should try to dig the lecture notes. I don't want to call any of these passive tutorial just because I'm calling the other ones active, because actually, and one of the benefits of doing that online is that we've been using more and more polls, and that has worked really well. So we had this type of polls, and as you have all noticed, the students are much more active in the chat in terms of interacting with us than they would be in the room, where we're probably intimidating. So they've not been passive. So I'm not calling those passive tutorials. But the thing is, it's easy to hide. So we've had some students who are there and really could be doing nothing or be distracted by a ting on their screen, just like us, or be at another window or doing something else. So it just creates some potential distractions. So we wanted to encourage the student to be more active in class. So instead, we only did that online. So we tried some group works and shared documents that we were not sure how it would work, and the tutors were a bit reluctant. So in stats in particular, we had some exercises which we would do the old way, with the tutor presenting in the main room and interacting with the students via polls and chats, so doing it with them. And then somewhere they would be sent to breakout groups. So I'm not describing something that would be board tutorials where the tutors and students would be in breakout through the whole time and never come together. So math has been more adventurous, and Josh will describe that. So in practice, so if let's say question 2 is going to be done through group work, well, we don't send the student through group work right away. First, in the main room, we look at the question with them. And so, because otherwise we realize some students don't really get started, we explain the story with words. And sometimes, if there are like 8 subjects, we would ask, what notation does it correspond to in the slide, and so on. So we get people started. And once we think they at least understand the story, they are ready to go work by themselves. So we share the link to some shared documents, which could be Excel or Word, in the chat. The students click on it and they see that. And we send them to breakout groups. So they're made randomly, so they don't know which group they're going to be in. But if on their screen it pops up that they're in group 6, they will click on the tab called group 6, and they will see that, and they will enter the answers for group 6 in there. Right. And we've put up some instruction for them. They need to turn on their mic, they need to introduce themselves, go on the right tab and work on the question as a team and enter their answers there. So so the tutor needs to know what's happening, because they're in breakout groups. We don't hear them anymore, and we don't see them, of course. So first, we do this in Blackboard Collaborate, which means you can see who has their mic on. And in theory, you send them to breakout group to talk to each other. So if you see that in a group there's not a single mic on, well, they're not talking to each other. They may be using the chat, but they're not doing that. And another thing is you have this tab which automatically collates for you. And so you can see, for example, in question 2A, what each group has been writing. So you can see if there's a group where nothing's happening. And so from there, or if they're happily starting in the wrong direction. From there, you have 2 options. If you just want to correct a few things or improve, please put your initials. You can actually type in the document. So I put my name, Laure, and blah, 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 put a comment, and then it puts them on the right track. It's a bit faster than moving there, because Blackboard Collaborate is slow. And if I see no one's talking to each other, then I will go in there and actually ask them to turn their mic on, say hi to each other, and get the thing started. So you can monitor from the main room what's happening and only intervene if it seems that nothing's working. If you do it in Word, then same thing. Initially, I thought we would always do it in Word because I thought it was easier for the student to type with the equation editor and so on. But it turns out in stats, they were doing maybe copy and paste of picture or typing mu, mu, and it was working fine in Excel. So Excel was working too. So same thing, they work in their own group. And they use these shared documents. In that case, it's a bit harder for you as the tutor to know what's happening. But still, since you have this navigation pane, if you set up the thing correctly and your A, B, and C are actually heading to heading 3 and so on, you can see the answers coming in the pane. So you can scroll up and down and you will see there's a group where nothing happens. And again, you use the mics to decide when you need to intervene. If they're struggling a little bit with the stat, that's fine. You don't have to go. But if the group is dead, that's when you need to do something. And so you're doing all of this, so you don't want to be distracted. So that's just a little tip, but we realize that some students get kicked out, some students arrive late, and then they want us to put them in a group. So we've put this on the screen. If you arrive late, this is how to join a group, basically. Don't distract me, just go join a group. So this was on the screen in the main room. So while the students do that, usually there were 2 of us in the room. One who was the main tutor would present the solution and organize and be responsible for creating the documents, and one who was the helper. So for the Word documents, for example, there was another document not shared with the students, only shared with the 2 tutors, where they would collate the answers. So that's the document where we would go over the solution. So we had the question, and at the bottom, basically, they would copy the answer to question A for all groups. And that way, when we bring them together, we're ready to comment on those. And so in Excel, same thing, we were preparing this document where we would do the debriefing with the whole group. And we would just copy and paste what they had said in Excel. And so the tutor can still handwrite below the solution, and they can still show the slide and point to the right place. And then so they make progress, and you prepare the debriefing, if you like, and then you bring them back. And then what I think was helping is we're going through their answer. It was based on their answer. You can also point the thing that a lot of groups have done wrong, which is why you don't want to correct too much in the groups. And then you can write solution or point what the solution would be, ideally by using blocks from what students have done. So in the end, it's their solution if you can do that. Of course, a lot of tutors find it easier just to rewrite the perfect solution without reusing too much what the students did, and it kills a bit the spirit. But if you want to really build on what the students have done, you can. So initially, we're giving very precise instruction to tutors. Initially, they were very grateful because they didn't know how to create the breakout groups and so on. Now they say it's too detailed, we don't need this anymore. But well, so that way they knew what to do if they were suddenly getting a bit lost. So that's what we did in stats.
Right, so for maths, it turns out we were also doing these sort of breakout room style tutorials. The reason we started doing this is a little bit different from what was happening in for maths. For maths, we were doing it slightly differently because we actually did start before the pandemic, experimenting with whiteboard style tutorials. Now, I think actually, I was reading my surveys yesterday for my teaching, and one of my students did comment, I'm very low energy. And I think that does show up in the way I've organized these too, in that I try to do the least amount of work possible. So despite the fact you see for a single tutorial, even if we only have 6 groups, I will still create a full 20 group set of documents. And I do this in the laziest way possible by actually getting an automated flow to do this for me. Unfortunately, one thing I did discover with these powerful automate tools is they can't sort. So I had to also bring in Python to just actually sort the list for me. Okay, next slide. Now, we are still, I think we haven't been as adventurous as Laure. We haven't actually tried to pin down the format as much. So what we've been doing is we have been giving the students questions, but we've just been giving them the free space in a Word document to write. And students really just find their own ways of wanting to do this. Some students like to write things on paper. I'm not so keen on that one myself, because that means one person's writing and nobody can see what they're doing. Some students have taken to actually just writing directly in the Word document using digital ink. And we've also been trying to encourage people to actually learn that Word has fairly powerful typesetting tools, and actually just learn to use these typesetting tools. They're very quick once you get to use them, as long as you have a Windows or a Mac machine. Linux users are unfortunately left behind, it seems. Next slide. So this is more examples of what people are doing. So we would, I guess, I was very hands-off. I wanted the tutors to find their own ways to give students comments after the tutorial. So what we'll do is everyone would actually work in a separate Word document, which I think is actually a disadvantage, but it was necessary technically just to stop the system from collapsing when so many students piled into a shared Word document. So you can see some of our students, some of our tutors have just taken to using the Word's comment features. Some have just taken to digitally inking on top. So the question is, how do people feel about this?
Yeah.
So we did survey our tutors. These are actually the surveys from statistics. You might be able to tell based on the fact that the interface is in French. If you look, yeah, nine responses. Now, if you take a look, I think we slightly made a mistake when setting up the survey. We allowed 3 responses when we really were just looking for the do you prefer or not prefer. So those 3 individual responses you see there are basically, so there's 2 new responses. One saying it's not necessary, so they don't really prefer, and that's a win. So I think they do strongly prefer. But if you look, the preference is for prefer. The tutors seem to think that this is a good idea.
I think it's striking that no tutor says that they strongly prefer not to do that. So there's a vast majority of tutors who think that it's a good thing.
Yes. So what do our tutors think are the best benefits for students? Well, we all think it's better to actually sit down and write, to work on a problem rather than just watching someone else do it. We know that watching someone else do the work is not really the best thing, and that was universally agreed by the tutors almost. They believe it is good for students to actually hit roadblocks and work out what doesn't work. I think a lot of my lectures are like this too, where I intentionally try and run us into a brick wall just so we can realize we shouldn't be going that way to begin with. It's good for the students to realize that actually the information you need is already provided. We provide a lot of lecture notes, which you just need to go through and find what you need to use, and it's there. We're not trying to be mean. These aren't problems you haven't seen before. It's good to get students' comments, of course. I guess that's one thing with our old tutorial style. I would always, in my old tutorial style, tell the students to give me their work to comment on. That never happened, not once in the how many years I've been teaching. So it's good to actually start to get them to just submitting their work this way. Yeah. And of course, we feel it's good for students. We feel students need to feel part of a community, that they're not just doing this on their own. All right. Now for tutors, they seem to believe it's best. There wasn't quite universal agreement here. There were 9 responses, and about the maximum one's only got about 5. So a slight majority thought it would be good to be able to tailor the tutorial to the students' work. I guess some of them just didn't really want to do it that way. And I did watch my own recordings for maths as well. And some of the tutors just would do their song and dance at the end. Here's how I would do the problem. I'm not going to incorporate what you've done, which I think is a bit sad. I do want to go back and make sure next.
Yeah, I want to go back and
instructions. But maybe not quite so many instructions, I guess. Co-teaching, yeah, we heard about co-teaching yesterday from Jonathan. It has been very positive. I think there is a majority of people who do enjoy co-teaching. Unfortunately, we don't have the age data, so I'm not sure how that correlates with the age of the teacher. Mm-hmm. And we think it's a benefit that tutors do get to talk to students in the breakout room. I mean, not as many people seem to thought that, but some people seem to think it was a benefit.
Yeah, I really thought, yes. But really seeing what the students do is a big help.
So what do we think are the drawbacks? Now, again, I think this sort of says not too many people thought there were drawbacks, but the biggest response there was just you can't cover as much material. But I think this is maybe just maybe we have a bit of a completion in our style tutorials. We would rush through the material. We believe that if we showed them everything, then at least they've seen it. They can't complain later that they haven't seen the material. But I think we have plenty of other avenues where you could show them every other single type of problem. So it doesn't have to be every type of problem in the tutorial. We possibly some thought that they could get bad mathematical writing from their peers, but not a majority. I think
I think it's almost a good thing, because then when you bring them back to the main room, you can comment on what's wrong. So they are told before they do it in the final exam. So I don't think it's a bad thing.
Yeah. Not too many people thought that students were teaching each other on shortcuts. So that's probably a good thing. And yeah, it can be hard to give each group a fair amount of your teaching time, but that's also true for any other style of tutorial.
And they're supposed to be working together also. In theory, in a perfect world, you don't go in the breakout room at all.
Right, so what are the main challenges? You can see that basically there was one thing that everyone agreed on. It's hard to get students active. We all know this. It's very hard to get students to be active in any form of tutorial. As soon as one person can dominate, they probably will end up doing most of the work, or it'll appear like they're doing most of the work. There are a few extra comments just from individuals. So some people thought, well, we could use better technology. Maybe the technology we're not using is the best. In fact, we saw Laure wasn't here during the talks yesterday, but I'll have to get her to watch the talk where people were using the Desmos classroom. A simplified interface like that might be something worth exploring.
The second answer is particularly telling, because the first complaint we had is, how do you want me to deal with creating breakout rooms, looking at what the students are answering, collating, doing all this at the same time? It's too much cognitive load. And now they're saying that it's fine.
Yeah, those
so if you try something like that and people say it's too hard, you can say, you'll get used to it.
Eventually, yeah, we'll get used to it. So that was tutors. What about students? So according to our surveys, it's very hard because we're not allowed to really just say, what did you think of the tutorials? We have to say, what did you think of the course overall? What are the best parts, the worst parts? So we had to just pull out those few comments we were able to find. Some people did notice that the group work didn't particularly work well, because one or two people of a group would sort of usually worked on it, and most people would not talk. We have trouble getting students being active. People felt it was wasted, only one or two people writing in the Word doc. Yeah.
So these are few comments, but they really kept appearing and appearing. Well, I would say first that 2 people per group actively working is sometimes as good or better than what we had in the traditional tutorial when these ones were actually writing. And they had this idea that if the tutor covered it, we would cover more, which is absolutely true, but I'm not sure they would understand it better, but we would do more. And so what was striking, because there are only 3 comments, but they were appearing 10 times. So what I think was most noticeable is what they didn't say, right? Not a single student said there's a value into trying versus watching, not a single of them. So that really points out to something we should do in the future, is to first explain this explicitly. Maybe we thought they knew, and in particular, there is this great article, which is a feeling of learning versus actual learning. Maybe we need to make them read that and explain to them what they see as a feeling of struggle is a feeling of learning. You have to go through these steps. The value of exploring what does not work. Not a single student said that. We've been discussing whether we should use, I don't know, a t-test or a z-test. And by doing this, we understood better what we had to do in a special case. We didn't get that. And none of them meant that it would teach them that, you struggle with a problem, what do you do? So I think actually changing the perception is going to be more important than changing what actually happens, which was a little bit of a revelation. Now we can also change the reality, what actually happens. And because depending on tutors, the level of participation is very different. And really, I think if you go in the first one and really tell them it's important that you talk, turn on your mic, you're insistent, you make jokes, you create a community, then they will start, but you really need to do this. And also in terms of changing, maybe we thought we could use something like Gather Town. And Gather Town, for those who have not seen it, so what you have on your screen is something that looks like a video game. And the good thing is, when you get close to a group, you'll start hearing what they say. And when you go away, you stop hearing what they say. So that means the tutor wouldn't need to jump in the group to know what's happening there. You could just walk by and overhear things. So if you hear things that terrify you in terms of content, maybe you can go and try to clarify. And if you also don't hear anything, then they're not talking. It could be actually much faster and less invasive than rather than having this person pop up in the breakout group with the name which appears on screen.
So you say in some of the tutorials, I think, were you just saying that when you jumped into tutorials, no, actually that was yesterday. You were here. Someone was saying if a tutor enters these rooms, it goes dead silent. This is
yes, or well, usually in the group which we're talking, the other problem is they don't notice that you're here. So either they stop or they don't notice, and then they wonder for how long you've been spying on them. Whereas I think they would see you come closer. And also sometimes you come in and then you realize, oh, it's not too bad, and then you move out. So it takes you 3 seconds to move in, 3 seconds to move out. You're wasting your time. Okay, so that's the ideas we